had never paid much attention to the sound of the postman's footsteps before that morning. Usually they came and went like any other noise in the quiet rhythm of my days. A faint shuffle, a closing gate, the soft clang of metal on metal. But that day, for some reason, the echo lingered a moment too long, as if he'd hesitated before leaving. When I opened my door, the air smelled of rain that hadn't fallen yet, damp, heavy, waiting. A single brown envelope lay on the mat, the paper slightly creased, tied with a piece of red thread. There was no return address, only my name, Grace Cole, written in a hand that trembled across the surface like it belonged to someone who'd written in haste or fear. I almost left it on the hall table. Bills, advertisements, charity requests. My mornings were full of them. But the red thread caught the light, thin as a vein, and curiosity tugged a little harder than caution. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a key. Old brass, worn smooth at the edges, the kind that belonged to a door no one had opened in years. Alongside it, a torn corner of another envelope with a single line scrawled in blue ink. 18, Maple Street. No explanation. No signature. I stood there for a while, turning the key between my fingers. It was surprisingly cold, as though it had been waiting in the dark. Now, my dear, I know what you're thinking. A woman my age should have known better. Strange keys and stranger notes belong to mystery novels, not to ordinary kitchens. But sometimes, when life grows too quiet, even fear begins to sound like adventure. By afternoon, the rain had started. I tried to busy myself watering the ferns, folding laundry, yet my eyes kept drifting to the envelope on the table. At last, I sighed, put on my coat, and slipped the key into my pocket. Maple Street was only a few blocks away, a row of houses older than most of the trees that shaded them. My husband and I had lived near there when we were first married. The thought made something stir in me, nostalgia maybe, or the ache of remembering happiness without its owner. Number 18 stood apart from the others, a cottage with ivy crawling up its brick sides like forgotten handwriting. The curtains were drawn, the porch rail cracked, and a faded "For Sale" sign leaned drunkenly against the fence. I should have turned back. Instead, I pushed open the gate. It complained with a rusty moan. The front door hung slightly ajar. I hesitated. "Hello," I called, my voice half swallowed by the wind. No reply. Inside, the air carried the stillness of a place long unlived in dust and echoes, and something faintly floral, as though someone had once loved it enough to leave a trace. A single candle burned on the kitchen table, its flame small but sure, and beside it lay a photograph. It took me a moment to realize what I was seeing. The picture was of me. Younger, yes, my hair darker, my smile less careful, but undeniably me, standing outside the house where my husband and I had once lived decades ago. I remembered the day that photograph was taken. We'd just planted the magnolia tree in the yard. I whispered into the emptiness. "Who are you?" No answer, only the candle flickering as if it had exhaled. Then came a sound from upstairs, the soft creak of a floorboard. I froze, listening. Once more, faint, deliberate. I wanted to run, but curiosity, that old companion, took my hand again. At the foot of the staircase, I saw it. A trail of dust disturbed by fresh footprints. They led upward. The banister felt cool beneath my fingers as I climbed. Each step groaned in protest, and my heart answered with its own. At the top stood a narrow door with a tarnished lock. Without thinking, I reached into my pocket and brought out the key. It slid in easily, turned with a click that sounded too welcoming. The attic smelled of cedar and thyme. Moonlight filtered through a broken window, falling across a small black trunk, bound with a thin red thread just like the envelope had been. I knelt and untied it. The thread fell away in silence. Inside the trunk lay a bundle of letters, stacked neatly, their paper yellowed and soft. Every envelope bore the same name written in that trembling script, Grace Cole. For a long while I simply stared, The air felt thick, alive with something unseen. My hands shook as I picked up the first envelope. "Grace," it began. "I never stopped thinking about that night. You deserve to know what really happened. I left something for you, something that explains everything. Don't let anyone take it from you. No signature." I read it again, the words pressing against old wounds I'd long thought healed. There had only ever been one night that fit that description, the night my husband died. Lightning flashed outside, throwing pale light across the room. For a second, I thought I saw movement in the corner, a shadow shifting. But when I turned, there was nothing, only the wind whispering through the broken pane. I opened another letter. They said it was an accident. It wasn't. Look under the floor. A chill crawled down my spine. My eyes darted across the wooden boards until I saw one that sat unevenly near the window. I pried it up with the edge of a candle holder. Beneath lay a small metal box, its lid sealed with more red thread. I untied it slowly, my breath loud in my ears. Inside was a gold bracelet, delicate and familiar, engraved with the initials, J.C., my husband's. I gasped so sharply the candle sputtered. That bracelet had vanished the same night he died. The police had said it was taken by the burglar who broke in. I clutched it to my chest, the metal still warm from the box. Who would hide it here, and why send it to me after all these years? Another folded note lay beneath the bracelet, the ink smeared but legible. "He tried to protect you, but the truth was never buried deep enough. Find me before they do," the candle guttered out. For a heartbeat, the attic drowned in darkness. Then the wind pushed the door wide open, and moonlight poured in again. I rose, heart hammering, every instinct screaming to leave. But before I reached the stairs, I heard it. A whisper, faint but close, right beside my ear. "Grace." I turned sharply. No one, only the empty room and the letters fluttering like frightened birds. I ran down the stairs and out into the rain. The night swallowed the house behind me as I hurried home, clutching the bracelet in my fist. By the time I reached home, my clothes were soaked through, and the rain had turned the street into a mirror of trembling lights. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and stood in the kitchen for a long time, listening to the sound of water dripping from the edges of my coat. On the table, I set the bracelet down. It looked so small there, a golden circle glinting softly under the lamplight. I ran my thumb over the initials. J.C. And for a moment, the years folded back like pages in an old book. I could almost hear his laughter again. John Cole, my husband, my steady compass through every storm. The night he died, the world had gone silent in a way that no sound ever filled again. They said it was a break-in, that he had surprised the thief, that fate had simply been cruel. But seeing that bracelet again, it stirred something that had never settled right in me. The police report, the missing evidence, the way they'd said burglary gone wrong, as if that could explain everything. Now, decades later, a key, a photo, a candle, a stranger's letters, all pointing back to that one wound. I made myself a cup of tea, though my hands trembled so badly that the spoon clattered against the cup. I sat down, trying to steady my breath. Outside, the rain whispered against the window like a secret trying to be heard. There was a knock at the door. I froze. 3 slow taps, then silence. My first thought was of the house. Had someone followed me? My heart raced, but I forced myself to the door. Through the frosted glass, I could make out a figure, tall, motionless, holding something in their hand. "Who's there?" I called out. The figure didn't move. I hesitated only a moment before opening the door, chain still fastened. A young man stood there, drenched, a postal cap pulled low over his eyes. In his hand, he held a small envelope, damp, edges curling. "Delivery for Miss Grace Cole," he said, his voice flat, almost rehearsed. "I didn't order anything," I replied. He only nodded. "No sender. Just this." He slipped it through the gap and turned away before I could ask more. The rain swallowed him almost instantly. I shut the door and stared at the envelope. The same handwriting, the same trembling letters. I tore it open with shaking fingers. Inside was a single slip of paper. Don't trust the story they told you. He left clues only you could find. Start with the magnolia tree. The magnolia tree. My chest tightened. That tree still stood outside the old house we'd shared. The one in the photograph I'd seen today. We'd planted it together the spring after our wedding. I pressed the note to my lips, fighting the rush of old grief. If someone wanted to torment me, they'd chosen the perfect wound to press. But if this was truth, if John had left something, then I needed to know. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the candlelight flickering over my younger face in that photograph. The gold of the bracelet catching the light. The whisper. Grace. By dawn, I had made my decision. I packed a small bag, slipped the key back into my coat pocket, and set out for the old house where the magnolia tree still bloomed. The street was quiet when I arrived, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth. The old cottage stood just as I'd left it, still watchful, waiting. The magnolia tree spread its pale flowers against the gray sky. Its roots curled into the earth like ancient hands. I knelt beside it, brushing away the damp leaves. Something metallic glinted beneath the roots. I dug carefully with my fingers until they struck a small tin box. My pulse quickened as I pulled it free. It was sealed shut with wax, dark red, brittle with age. I pried it open. Inside were papers, folded tight. The ink had bled in places, but I could still make out John's handwriting. My breath caught. Grace, if you're reading this, it means I couldn't tell you myself. There are things I learned too late. About the people around us. About what us I was part of. I thought I could protect you by staying silent. But silence is just another kind of lie. I sat back on my heels, rain starting to fall again. The paper blurred as I read on. There was no burglar that night. I had kept something, evidence, that others wanted. They came for it, not for me. If anything happens to me, follow the key. It leads to the truth. The key, the one that had arrived only yesterday. After all these years, someone had kept his message hidden. Until now, I looked toward the cottage, my heart pounding. Who had held these secrets all this time? And why release them now, when almost everyone from that chapter of my life was gone? I tucked the letter into my coat, rose slowly, and turned back toward the gate. That's when I noticed something strange. A window curtain on the second floor had moved. Just slightly. Someone was inside. I ran my hand over the bracelet on my wrist. My husband's initials glinting faintly through the rain. And for the first time in years, I whispered his name aloud. John, if you left this for me, help me find the rest. The wind stirred the magnolia petals, scattering them across the path like pale tears. Then, gathering my courage, I walked back toward the door of that waiting house, the same house where it had all begun, and stepped inside once more. The days after the visit to the river passed, like pages turning themselves. I woke each morning to the sound of the magnolia petals brushing against my window, and every evening I sat with the key beside my teacup, tracing its worn edges until the brass grew warm beneath my fingers. It was strange how an object so small could hold a life inside it. I thought of John's hands, steady, gentle, and how they must have turned this same key once, long before it found its way back to me. The river called to me again before the week was over. The sound of it lingered in my ears at night, low and constant, like a heartbeat under the floorboards of the world. So I went back, carrying only my coat, the bracelet, and a notebook that had once belonged to him. The path was softer this time, the ground still damp from rain. Mist rose from the water, thin as breath. I stood by the edge for a long time, staring at the slow curl of current. The river did not hurry. It remembered too much to rush. I opened the notebook. Between old sketches of houses and mechanical notes from his work, a folded clipping slipped free. It was from the town paper dated the week before he died. Local contractor questions mill's safety plans. Leak of toxic waste feared. Beneath the headline was a small photograph of John, smiling in that quiet way he had when he believed he was doing the right thing. A tremor went through me. All these years I had believed the story of the burglary, but now I saw the line between his death and the river, thin as the red thread that had bound the letters. Perhaps he had found something, evidence of wrongdoing, something that could have ruined powerful men, and perhaps those men had found him first. The air grew heavier. The water seemed darker. I closed the notebook and whispered a promise to the wind. I would carry his truth, even if it changed everything I thought I knew about the life we'd shared. That night, the final letter arrived. No footsteps, no knock, just the soft rustle of paper slipping through the mail slot as I poured my tea. The envelope was the same rough brown, but this time the red thread was tied in a small, perfect bow. I untied it slowly, afraid of what silence would follow. Inside was a single sheet, written in the same trembling hand that had haunted me for weeks. Grace, the truth has waited long enough. John's death was not a random act. He found the records and he tried to stop them. They took him because he refused to be silent. The woman by the river kept his notes safe all these years. She never meant to frighten you. She wanted you to know that his courage saved many lives downstream. The company closed. The spill was stopped, and your husband's name was kept clean only by staying hidden. Forgive us for letting you believe the story they told. There was no signature, only a faint imprint at the bottom of the page, the blurred circle of a ring that once pressed wax into seals. I held the paper to my chest. Tears didn't come at first, only stillness. Then, slowly, the ache that had lived inside me for 3 decades loosened its grip. So that was the truth. He had died not because of greed or chance, but because of conscience. And all these years, strangers had carried the weight of his silence so that I could live untouched by it. I looked at the bracelet on my wrist. Its gold dulled now with age, and felt something settle deep within me. The story had never been about loss. It had been about the cost of keeping goodness alive. I lit a candle and placed it beside the key and the bracelet. Their shadows merged on the wall like 2 figures meeting again after a long separation. Outside, the rain began softly, almost like applause. For several days after the final letter, I lived in a hush that didn't quite feel like silence. It was as though the house itself had taken a long breath and decided, at last, to rest. I left the candle burning through the night, its flame small and unwavering. Each morning a thin line of wax crept down the holder, soft as the passing of time. I would wake, find the melted trail, and smile to myself. He was here, I would think. Some part of him stayed. But peace, I've learned, never arrives uninvited. It waits until you are brave enough to call it in. One afternoon I took the key from the mantel and held it tightly in my palm. The metal had warmed over the days, as though it had a heartbeat of its own. Something inside me whispered that I should visit the cottage once more, if not for answers, then for gratitude. The air was clear that day, the river quiet under a pale sky. The magnolia tree at the gate had begun to lose its blossoms, the ground below carpeted with white. The door of the cottage opened easily now, no longer swollen with damp. The air inside carried that same faint scent of coffee and smoke, but softer this time, gentler, as if the ghosts had tidied up after themselves. I walked through each room slowly. The dust had settled again, the furniture as I remembered it. Only the attic drew my eye, the trapdoor slightly ajar as though inviting me upward one last time. The steps creaked beneath me, familiar now, like old floorboards greeting an old friend. The trunk was still there, though empty, its interior lined with faint impressions where the letters had once lain. I knelt and touched the wood. Beneath my hand I felt a faint hollow, one board looser than the rest. I pried it gently, expecting nothing. Underneath lay another small envelope, dry despite the years. My name again. My heart stumbled. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single piece of paper in John's handwriting. "If you ever find this, it means I kept my promise. You were never meant to bear the burden of my choices. The truth would have taken your peace, and that was something I could not allow. Remember me kindly, Grace, not for what I did, but for what I tried to save." I closed my eyes. The attic smelled of cedar and thyme, and for the first time in 30 years, I let myself weep. Not from grief, but from release. I had spent so long searching for the why, when what I really needed was to say thank you. When I opened my eyes again, the sunlight had shifted. A thin beam fell across the bracelet on my wrist, scattering light like tiny embers. It looked almost alive, and I understood then that the dead do not vanish. They simply move into quieter places. I left the attic door open as I went down, letting the sunlight follow me like a blessing. Before I left, I paused in the doorway. The house no longer felt haunted. It felt held, as if the walls themselves had exhaled their secret and could finally rest. At the garden gate, I turned the key one last time in the lock. It turned easily, without sound. When I pulled it free, I didn't feel the urge to keep it anymore. I placed it gently beneath the magnolia tree, covered it with a handful of earth, and whispered, "We're done now." The wind rose softly, scattering petals over my shoes. I stood there until the breeze faded, and the world grew still again. Then I walked home. That evening, as dusk folded over the town, I lit the final candle and placed the bracelet beside it. The flame wavered, caught itself, and steadied, just like me. I realized then that closure isn't about locking doors. It's about learning which ones never needed to be opened in the first place. John's story had been one of courage, mine one of endurance. Together they had written something complete, something neither of us could have finished alone. Outside, the magnolia tree swayed in the last of the light, and I thought about all the things that survive us. Love, truth, the quiet echo of a name whispered in gratitude. And as the candle burned low, I spoke softly to the night, my words barely a breath. "Rest easy now. I understand." The smell of the cottage met me before the darkness did. Dust, old wood, and the faint trace of something freshly burned. When I stepped inside again, the air was warmer than it should have been. Someone had been here since I left. A cup sat on the table, a small ring of steam still lifting from the surface. I could see my own reflection in it, blurred, uncertain. The candle I had seen before was gone, replaced by another one burned halfway down. Even the photograph of my younger self had been moved, tilted slightly as if a hand had touched it, testing its edges. The floorboards whispered beneath my shoes. I had spent half my life teaching myself not to be afraid of the things I could not explain. Yet fear has a way of finding the cracks in courage. I told myself the wind had opened the door, that perhaps the housekeeper of the estate had come to check on the property. But deep inside I knew this was no accident. The house was alive now, watching, breathing, remembering. I moved slowly through each room. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee. The clock above the sink had stopped at 3:10. In the living room, the fireplace was cold, but ashes lay fresh inside it. I touched the mantel and felt warmth still clinging to the stone. Whoever had been here had left only moments before I returned. The stairs seemed steeper than I remembered. Every step pressed a story from the wood, each grown like a sigh from the past. At the top, the narrow hallway stretched toward the attic door. I could almost hear the rain sliding down the roof, each drop like the ticking of time running backward. When I reached the attic, the air changed. It smelled of cedar, paper, and something faintly metallic. The letters were gone. Only the trunk remained, lid open, hollow like a mouth mid-confession. On the floor lay one sheet of paper, folded once neatly, my name on the front. My hands trembled as I opened it. "Grace, you were never meant to find the key this way. But since you have, you must know what John kept hidden was not meant to harm you. He was trying to protect you from a promise he could no longer keep. If you want to understand, seek the woman who lives by the river. She remembers everything. The woman by the river." I pressed the paper to my chest and let the silence stretch until it hummed in my ears. There was only one river in this town, narrow, slow, winding behind the old mills. I had not walked that path since the funeral, yet now the thought of it felt inevitable, as though all the years between had been nothing but a single held breath. The next morning the fog hung thick over the water. The path was slippery, the air cold enough to sting the lungs. Every step forward felt like peeling away another layer of memory I had wrapped around myself for safety. The river moved lazily beside me, gray and indifferent. At a bend in the path stood a cottage half hidden by willows. The windows were dusty, the porch sagging, but smoke curled from the chimney. I stopped at the gate and closed my eyes, letting the sound of the water fill me. I had once known this rhythm, the quiet pull of tide and time. Inside that house, someone was alive with secrets. I could feel it. Yet instead of knocking, I stood still and listened. Through the walls came the soft scrape of a chair, the creak of old floorboards, and then silence. Whoever lived there knew I was outside. A part of me wanted to turn back. But curiosity, the same thread that had pulled me toward every heartbreak in my life, tightened again. I imagined the woman inside. Perhaps she was old like me, her face folded with stories too heavy to speak aloud. Perhaps she had known John once, before the years carved us into strangers. Perhaps she had loved him in some small, hidden way that I had never seen. The thought didn't sting as I expected it to. Instead, it brought a strange calm, as if understanding his secrets might finally let me release mine. I stepped closer to the window and peered through a gap in the curtain. The room beyond was dim but lived in, a lamp glowing weakly, shelves lined with photographs turned face down, and on the table, letters. My letters. The same handwriting. A chill rippled through me. She had them all. The missing pages from the attic. The ones I had thought lost. She was the keeper of his story. And maybe of mine. I stood there for a long time, watching the gentle pulse of light from the lamp flicker across those papers. Then I turned away. Some truths do not need to be taken by force. They wait until the heart is ready to carry them. I walked back along the river, the bracelet on my wrist catching the pale sun. Every step seemed to echo his name against the water. The more I listened, the more I realized that this was not a story about death at all. It was about love that had changed shape, slipping beyond the reach of ordinary forgiveness. By the time I reached home, the sky had opened and rain fell again. Soft, cleansing, familiar. I placed the bracelet on the table beside the key, and the letters I still kept. The red thread lay curled like a sleeping serpent. I brewed tea, letting the steam rise, and whispered into the quiet house. "John, I'm still listening." The air shifted then, a subtle warmth brushing my cheek as though the past itself had exhaled. Outside, the magnolia tree swayed in the wind, petals drifting down like white memories returning to earth. And somewhere, far away, I could almost hear the river answering back. The morning after, I buried the key beneath the magnolia tree. The world felt softer somehow. The air was clear, the sky open and forgiving. Even the house seemed lighter, as if the weight it had carried had finally drifted away with the night. I made tea and sat by the window, my usual spot, the one that catches the first sunlight. The steam rose in slow spirals, and for the first time in a very long time, my hands were steady. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to forget that one night. The years of silence, the years of pretending not to wonder. I had grown so used to living beside unanswered questions that they had become part of me, like old furniture in a familiar room. But now that I knew, now that the truth had quietly unfolded, I realized something that took my breath away. Knowing didn't erase the pain, but it made the love real again. I looked at the bracelet lying on the table, its gold catching the morning light. It had stopped feeling like a reminder of loss and had become a symbol of continuity. The circle unbroken, the promise kept. Grief is not something we heal from, my dear. It's something we learn to live with, until it begins to hum in harmony with the rest of life. like the river outside this town, always moving, always returning to the same sea. Sometimes I walk there in the evenings. The path is quiet, the air cool against my skin. The willows bend toward the water, and the magnolias line the way like soft white lanterns. When I reach the bend where the woman's cottage stands, I always pause. I don't knock. I don't need to. It's enough to know she's there, still guarding what remains of John's truth, the same way I guard his memory. There's a peace in silent understanding, a language that doesn't need words. As the days passed, I began to speak to him again softly, the way I used to when he was fixing something in the garden or reading in his chair. The house seemed to listen. Sometimes when the wind moved through the rooms, I would almost hear him answer. Not in words, but in the calm that followed. I told him about the key, about how I'd found the letters, about the fear that had lived inside me for so long. And I thanked him, not for hiding the truth, but for giving me a reason to seek it. The seeking had woken me. I had spent too many years moving through life like a ghost in my own home, afraid to disturb the past. But uncovering his story had reminded me that I was still alive, still capable of discovery, still capable of love. And isn't that what truth really does? It doesn't free us from pain. It frees us from the illusion that pain is all there is. One evening, as the sun slipped low behind the hills, I found myself sitting on the porch, watching the light turn the world to gold. I thought of how time moves. Not in straight lines, but in circles, always returning, always beginning again. The red thread from the letters lay coiled on the table beside me. I lifted it between my fingers, tracing its soft fibers. How strange, I thought, that something so fragile had carried me through so much darkness. It had led me from a key to a house, from a house to a truth, from a truth to myself. I tied the thread gently around the bracelet and smiled. A circle within a circle. An ending made whole. Later that night, I opened the window. The air smelled of rain and magnolias. Somewhere in the distance, the river whispered, carrying its secrets to the sea. I spoke quietly, not to the night, not even to John, but to whoever might be listening. Perhaps you sitting there now, with your own unanswered questions. My dear, I said, there will come a time when a piece of your past finds its way back to you. Maybe a letter, a photograph, a memory you thought was lost. When it does, don't turn away. The past doesn't return to hurt you. It returns to show you how far you've come. We all have our keys. Small, unexpected moments that unlock parts of ourselves we thought were gone forever. Sometimes they come with pain, sometimes with grace. But they always come with purpose. The key that found me didn't belong to any door in this world. It belonged to a truth I was finally ready to open. And now that I have, I no longer need to keep it. I keep the light instead. The candle burns beside me as I tell you this. Its flame steady, unafraid. The gold bracelet catches its glow. A quiet halo of love that never left, only changed form. I close my eyes and breathe in the stillness, feeling the weight lift, the years align. And somewhere in that silence, I feel his presence, not as a ghost, but as warmth, as memory, as peace. That's how love survives, you see. Not in the things we hold on to, but in what we finally let go. So, if you're listening tonight, remember this. Some mysteries are not meant to be solved. They are meant to be lived, understood slowly, like a song that takes a lifetime to finish. I am Grace, and this was my story. The key didn't belong to me, but the peace it brought, that always will.